It's 9 to 9. A new report into the state of Tasmania's public schools shows that last year, 54 teachers quit in their first 5 years of teaching. That's after 4 years at university and thousands of dollars worth of training. The state government's education key data report also found that there's been a big increase in psychological injury claims by teachers, up 55% to 84 claims last year. So what is going so wrong in Tasmanian public schools that teachers feel forced to leave or feel psychologically damaged by their teaching experience? David Genford is the president of the Australian Education Union in Tasmania. David, good morning.
Morning, Mel. How are you?
Marvellously well, thank you. David, why are so many teachers leaving the profession and leaving so soon?
Yeah, it's a good question, and when you read that data out, it is a stark reality of what's happening. And I think the point you made that people are doing 5 years of university education, a lot of money put into it. They don't walk away from this lightly. I think we've got a situation where teachers are overworked, that they're relying to asked to do too much in the school, and we just don't have the right supports in place.
And so what kind of situations are they finding themselves in the classrooms when they come out of university, David?
I think the reality of what it's like to deal with so many individual students. You've got such big classes at the moment. That is a decision by the government to not cap class sizes. And you've got so much trauma background. You've got students with a disability. You've got all these different intricacies that it's actually really difficult to manage to try and make sure you're getting the best learning for those students. And one of the major issues is that the focus for teachers isn't just on teaching and learning, because of the lack of professional support staff in schools, the lack of in-class support, is that they're having to deal with a whole range of different things that isn't something you learn from a textbook, is something that qualified workers such as psychologists, social workers should be helping with, and not being a reliance on the teachers and the support staff in the classroom.
So if you had a wish list, what would the priorities be in terms of managing retention among teachers, David?
I think we need to give them in-class support. Let's have a look at how many teacher assistants are provided. I think what we've seen is that with the disability model being used, sometimes you would shake your head at a student that doesn't actually get a full-time teacher assistant. And you're seeing schools having to do the best they can by providing, say, a teacher assistant in the class that they know there's 2 or 3 students require support. Let's actually get legitimate support in classrooms for teachers. Let's actually, in those first 5 years especially, make sure we've actually got a really solid mentoring program that's in place. And let's actually show everyone that we're treating public education seriously. Let's fund it. Let's get that professional support into schools. And also, I think class size is something that also needs to be reviewed. It's becoming a very complicated situation for people to have to deal with.
David Genford, we also heard on the weekend the rather confronting statistics, it has to be said, of children with disabilities being suspended from state schools. Is that part of the conversation that you're having now about the individual needs of students? Why is it happening?
Absolutely. I think, first of all, I'd say we need to also make sure we're backing our principals, that they don't suspend students lightly, but the reality is, what resources do we have in our schools to make sure our students with a disability have the correct support in the classroom, so they're staying engaged, that they're actually getting the most out of their learning as well? Because we know that when students are being suspended, they've usually acted up, they've done the wrong thing. Is it a case of they're actually not engaged? Have they fallen through the cracks at an early age to make sure that we're getting the support they need? There's nothing worse than being in a class, and we've done it before, when someone's talking to you and you've got absolutely no idea what they're talking about. How do you actually then learn from it? You can't feel like you're part of the classroom. So if we can actually provide that support, look at the model that's being used. We're putting a lot of stress on teachers to actually prove what adjustments they're being made to those students' learning, instead of actually giving them the time to plan and prepare and make sure we're keeping those students focused in school.
So what actually happens in the lead up to a child being suspended? And some of these are quite young, David. What's the process there if everything is taken into account?
Yeah, I think it can depend on the severity of what's happened, because we do need to make sure we're keeping our schools safe. But you would often have you've got leadership to make sure you've got conversations with the schools, conversation with the parents, making them aware of what's happening. but often the resources are limited. How do you fix things? If it's not working, it's not working. I think it's also key. We need to make sure that people aren't getting repeat suspensions. If they've had that suspension, what's the process in place for them to return to school? How do we actually make sure that they've got that support? I don't think we have those numbers that you were quoting before. Those students don't turn up trying to get themselves suspended. We need to make sure we actually help them whilst also keeping our schools safe.
David Genford, thank you very much for the conversation this morning. Much appreciated.
Cheers. Thanks, Mel.
David Genford there is the Tasmanian President of the Australian Education Union. Have you had that experience?